Okay, wonderful. Good afternoon, everyone. Thank you so much for joining us today for the history of the Mbta spider map with our expert cartographer, Ken Dumas. My name is Kate White, and I'll be helping facilitate the event today. So Ken, if you want to head us over to the virtual meeting guidelines, I'd love to walk people through before we get started. So some of you might be familiar if you've attended a Boston Region Metropolitan Planning Organization meeting before, but at the MPO, we love to go over our guidelines so everyone knows where they're at when they're joining a virtual event. At this time, all participants are joining with muted microphones. And the facilitators today are going to be helping manage the muting and unmuting of microphones. And if you want to, when we get to the Q&A, which will be at the end of Ken's presentation, you can either ask your question in the chat, or you can raise your hand and ask your question out loud, and then I'll help by calling that on. And if, depending on your Zoom function, you can find your raise hand feature either at the bottom on your toolbar in Zoom. It might also be in your participants list, or it might also be in your reactions button. If you have any trouble whatsoever, feel free to reach out to Roisin Foley, who's our MPO staff member helping with technical difficulties today. You can reach her in the chat box at rfoley@ctps.org or 857-702-3704. And if you're joining by phone, you can always raise your hand by pressing *9, but we'll make sure to get to all those Q&A at the end of the presentation. So Ken, you want to do next slide? So again, I'm so excited to introduce Ken Dumas. He is our senior graphic artist and cartographer at the Boston Region Metropolitan Planning Organization, or the MPO, and an adjunct professor teaching classes at the Brookline Adult Education Center and the Art Institute of Boston. Ken is also an avid tour guide. You might have been on his tours before. He hosts tours like Brookline's Hidden River and Secret Stairways for organizations like Walk Boston and Brookline Historical Society. He holds a bachelor's degree in communications and media studies from Syracuse University. And as a staff member at the MPO for the past 32 years, Ken Dumas has been responsible for first-class cutting-edge digital maps for the Commonwealth of Massachusetts and the MBTA. His goal is creating a product that can be understood with little to no learning curve, empowering individuals to figure things out for themselves. He likes to find new ways to communicate complex ideas in the most effective manner to the largest audience. And his joy comes when someone learns something new. So Ken has been designing the MBTA map for the past 30 years, and we're really excited to hear more about the history of the spider map today. So with that, Ken, do you want to take it away?
Well, thank you. Thank you, Kate. That's such a wonderful introduction, and good afternoon on this very windy day here. Yes, for the past 3 decades or so, I have been the keeper of, among many things, the MBTA Rapid Transit Map. And today I'm going to be talking about the things that have shaped this map over time. Now, of course, whenever the MBTA has a change in service, they have a new transit line, or a station name gets changed, or they add accessibility to a station, those kind of things, you would expect that this kind of information, of course, would be added to this map. But there are other things that have influenced the look of this map over time, and that's the things that I'm going to talk about today. Now, most of these things have been from a design point of view, but many of these issues have been actually from a political point of view, and some of them have been cultural. But before I get into my involvement on this map, I first want to go all the way back to the very beginning. This is the very first official MBTA rapid transit map. It was made by a consulting firm called Cambridge 7 and Associates, and they not only wanted to make a very simple, easy to read, basic map, but they also wanted to be able to have it printed very, very small, so you could basically keep it in your purse, your wallet, or your pocket. Now, if we look at this map today, we can see that a lot has changed on the MBTA in the past 55 years. So looking at this map, we can see that this does not show the extension of the red line going all the way to Alewife. This does not show the second branch of the red line going to Quincy and Braintree. And originally, the orange line, at least north of the city, was an elevated rail line that went to the cities of Charlestown and Everett. And south of the city was also an elevated rail line going down the Washington Street corridor in Roxbury. And if you've ever wondered why of the 4 branches of the Green Line, they start with the letter B, well, there used to be an A line. Now, hang on. Now, there is a lot of urban legend and myth surrounding how the MBTA lines got their now well-known distinctive colors. And it goes a little something like this. So the green line is supposedly green because it goes along the Frederick Law Olmsted parks. The red line is red because of the Harvard crimson color. The blue line is blue because it goes under the harbor. The orange line is orange because it goes along what used to be Orange Street. And the commuter rail is purple because it used to be the color of royalty. Now, this is a really fun story to tell your friends and maybe impress that relative you see once a year at Thanksgiving. But this is not exactly the way the story went, because I've actually met with the original designers of the map, and what they told me that first they picked the very 4 distinctive colors. They wanted them to be warm colors because warm colors kind of jump off the page, whereas cool colors will tend to recede. But once they had decided on the 4 colors, then they had to decide which line would get which color. So after some discussion, it seemed very obvious to them that the one going under the harbor should be blue. And then, yeah, the one that goes to Harvard, yeah, because of the crimson color, we'll make that one red. But as far as the orange line and the green line, it was basically a 50-50 coin toss as to which line got which color. And by the way, the commuter rail is not purple because it's the color of royalty, even though purple is the color of royalty. It's because it was the next available color in their color palette. Now, this here is the rapid transit map of my youth. This one debuted in 1987, and you can see how it got the nickname, the Spider Map. Now, as I started to play around with some new designs for this map in the early 1990s, there were 2 big issues I was going to have to deal with. The first one has to do with the green line, or a better way of describing it, what's not on the green line. Looking at this map, it is amazing how much information has been left off. To give an example, or sense of what's missing, this might be a little closer to what it should look like. And as you can see, there are a large number of stations that aren't even shown, let alone labeled. Now, the reason for this is because the designers of the map were trying to contain the green line into the lower left-hand corner of the map. Hang on, it's not advancing. There we go. Okay. So as you can see in this design, they were trying to basically keep the green line into the lower left-hand corner for a sense of a balance and symmetry. And this actually makes some sense because if you gave the green line its fair due, you might have a map that looks something like this. This map was created in 1991 by a colleague of mine. He lives in England, and he thought it would be fun to draw the MBTA as though it were like the London system. And as you can see, by giving every facility equal weight, the green line starts to take over the map. Now, it's a very important part of the system, but it isn't more than 2/3. And so going forward, I was going to have to find a way to kind of deal with the fact that I was going to have to show the green line somewhere between these 2 extremes. Now, the next issue is a political one, and it was a doozy, and it has to do with the old elevated orange line going down Washington Street. This line served its community very, very well, but it wasn't a very well-liked service. It was loud, it was screechy and obtrusive, and there was talk of replacing it actually ever since the day the service opened. Well, in 1987, the orange line got moved from where it was going down the Washington Street corridor in Roxbury over to the Southwest corridor. Now, on this map, it may not look like it went very far, but it actually was moved quite a distance, essentially removing it from the neighborhood that it served into an area that, at least at the time, had very little development. Now, This allowed the MBTA to create a sunken, more reliable service. But a more important question might be, what's the Southwest Corridor and why did the Orange Line get moved there? Well, to understand this, we have to go all the way back to the late 1950s when the federal government was laying out its new interstate highway program. Now, keep in mind that an interstate highway is a limited access road that can only be used via an exit or an interchange. And in the Boston area, there are a number of interstates that we're probably all familiar with. So we have Interstate 90, which we all often refer to as the Massachusetts Turnpike. Interstate 93, which many people use as the Southeast Expressway. We have Interstate 95, which is the ring road going around the city of Boston. And we'll just throw in 495 for good measure. Well, the original plan was to have Interstate 95 continue up from the city of Providence and straight on through to the city of Boston via what's called the Southwest Corridor, not to be confused with the Southeast Corridor, which is where the Southeast Expressway was eventually built. But as we know, that's not what happened. The Interstate 95 actually takes a big left turn in the town of Canton and follows the old Route 128 as a ring road around the city of Boston. And so in the other direction, they constructed Interstate 93. And for those of us, which basically starts off a little south, goes east-west, and then eventually turns north to become the Southeast Expressway, goes through the city of Boston on up to the state of New Hampshire. And for those of us who are old enough, we might remember there was a very confusing but humorous road sign right here. No, this is not a joke. This is not a doctored image in Photoshop. There actually was this sign because you were basically going 93 north while on 128 south. But if you look at an aerial photograph of the interchange as it stands today, where 95 does make this big left turn in Canton, you'll notice that they had continued the interchange going north with the expectation of the highway to continue. And if we follow those brown dots to the top of the page, you'll notice that this leads to another series of brown dots for another proposed highway, Boston's infamous Inner Belt. This was going to be a tight ring road that was going to go through a section of Roxbury, a little piece of Brookline, cross the Charles River where the BU Bridge stands today, go right through Cambridgeport, Central Square, Cambridge, Inman Square, Union Square, Somerville, and connect to 93 north of the city. To give you a sense of the scale of this project, this is a rendering of the proposed 80-foot tall bridges that were going to be built over the Charles River where the BU Bridge stands today. And the only part of this project they ever completed was the part that we now call Melnia Boulevard. But they had to destroy a low-income residential neighborhood in order to do this. And this led to a lot of backlash and a lot of protest. And the real bone of contention came with this interchange right here, which is where 95 was going to meet the Inner Belt, as it was called, which was going to become Interstate 695. Now, if we look at this rendering here, in the lower right-hand corner, you can see what this would have looked like from space. And the rest of the main diagram is very misleading because it gives the impression that there are no buildings where the highway was going to go. In fact, the only buildings shown on this are some historic buildings and all of the public housing. But as you can see, there were lots of buildings here, and this was going to be a very destructive project. Well, at the end of the day, it didn't matter because there were so many protests on all aspects of this that the governor of Massachusetts at the time, who's pictured in the upper right-hand corner, he not only stopped the project, but he gave the money from the highway and put it toward transit. Now, at this time, you're asking, but wait a minute, Ken, I signed up to watch a presentation about the history of the T-map, and you've spent 5 minutes talking about a highway. Am I in the wrong chat room? No. The reason why I'm telling you all this is because when it came time for the T to come out with its new version of its spider map in 1987, they did not want to make reference to any of this. And so as a result, they simply left the design the same, but just changed the station names. So now we get into the early 1990s, and I'm starting to play around with the new design for a map. And I bring it up every now and then, every couple of years, wanting them to go with this new design that I keep basically hounding them for. But it's pushing too many buttons, and too many people are saying, well, we're not really ready. Well, we're not too sure. It's too politically sensitive. But eventually enough time went by, and by 1995, the MBTA decided that this would now be the new official MBTA rapid transit map. And as you can see here, the orange line has clearly been moved. It's no longer a vertical line. It's now at a 45-degree angle, clearly showing that it is now in the southwest corridor. The green line branches are now going east-west, with the D line being substantially longer than the B and C surface branches. You can see here that it is a much longer ride to Braintree than it is to Ashmont. And to give the map a sense of place, I added all of the major highways. And then I did what turned out to be the most controversial thing I'll ever do in my entire career. I added a shoreline. Now, there's a wonderful expression that I love that says stealing from one is plagiarism, but stealing from many is research. And in doing my research on this map, I noticed that every transit map I looked at all over the world would show water, even if it was only just a river. Well, we're Boston, we're Seaport, we're on the ocean. We should have a shoreline. As far as the green line goes, I didn't quite fix the problem, but at least it was a move in the right direction. So because my map was focusing so much on geographical realism, I didn't have the room to label every single green line station. But the compromise was, let's at least show every station and label the ones we can. So there was room, so all the stops on the D branch got labeled, and on the surface parts of the B, C, and E branches, we only labeled the handicap accessible ones. Now, so very quickly, this map started to get used all over the MBTA system. It was even printed in every phone book, back when we used to have phone books. And it was used as the map on the new mbta.com website. But there was one place this map never appeared, and that was in any one single rapid transit station. And that was because the process by which a map was made for the station was a very time-consuming and expensive one, where essentially the map was baked in an oven onto a giant piece of enamel. And essentially we had this giant heavy piece of pottery that you would bolt to the wall, approximately 4 feet square. Now, this made a great durable map that would last for a decade, and it would be weather resistant and be great to have outdoors, but it meant that the map would very rarely, if ever, be updated. And so the way they got around this problem is they would put very large stickers over the map. And on this image here, you can see there's a big sticker over the lower right-hand corner to show that the orange line stations had changed their names. Also, in the upper left, it's a little hidden under the frame they bolted, but there's a little sticker showing the extension of the red line going to Alewife. But another reason why this map didn't appear in a single station is because the MBTA Design and Construction Department, at least at the time, was responsible for the maps in the stations, felt it was their job to create a new map, and so they basically resented me and my new design. Their feeling was, well, who's this smart-ass kid a couple of years out of college making a new map design when nobody asked him to? Well, there's another expression I love. Sometimes it's better to ask forgiveness than ask permission. Well, at the end of the day, there were now 2 official MBTA rapid transit maps. The one on the left appeared in paper form and digital form, and the one on the right, the original Cambridge 7, was still in every single rapid transit station. This stalemate continued for about 4 years and might have continued even longer if not for something to force the issue. And that was the arrival of the Silver Line. The MBTA was now going to be adding a 5th transit line, and it was going to have to go on the map somewhere. Now, I did not set out to do this on purpose, but because I made a map focusing so much on geographical realism, it was very easy for me to put the Silver Line in because I basically had the room. I could simply just drop it in. The problem with the Cambridge 7 design, though, is that it's a wonderful design, but it's so symmetrical. Where's the Silver Line going to go? because after all, it technically has to go here because it is the replacement for the old elevated orange line, which means the orange line could then go here. So where's the green line going to go? So at the end of the day, there had to be a new map. Well, design and construction, believing that it was their responsibility to make such a map, did exactly that. And this is their design here. And as you can see, this is a hybrid of my design and the original Cambridge 7. But there are two substantial differences. First of all, this map contains no major highways. When I inquired as to why they didn't want highways on their design, they said, well, you know, it's really not the job of the MBTA to advertise other modes of transportation. Now, at the time, I found this to be very humorous and kind of confusing. For one, I just felt so many people are car-oriented anyways, and they know where the highways are, that maybe if they knew where they were in relationship to the MBTA, maybe they'd actually get out of their car and use the system. But the other reason is that in the 1990s, most of the federal transportation planning funds were based around the idea of intermodalism. We were supposed to show all the modes together. Another thing about this map is it doesn't have a shoreline. This is the one thing design and construction hated the most. It just drove them crazy that I added a shoreline. And when I inquired as to why, they said, well, we've never done it before, so we're not going to start now. That is my favorite answer of all time because there's no comeback. It was said to me on 3 occasions with a complete straight face, no irony. One of the other interesting facts about this map is, now, as it turns out, one of the reasons why they couldn't use this design, even if they wanted to, is that because they wanted, in an attempt to pay homage to the original Cambridge 7, they had the angles of the lines meeting downtown at very sharp right angles. And so in doing so, you essentially created a new transit line. Now, I'm sure many people could make the case that even if you were colorblind, you might be able to tell that these are two different colored lines, but it doesn't matter. Anyone's eye or brain just wants to put this together as one line. And there were many people with no visual disabilities who thought that it was a one-seat ride from Forest Hills all the way to Wonderland. Another reason why this map couldn't really be, or I didn't like about it, this was actually a feature, was that the designer told me that he put a pin in the middle of the page, drew a circle, and had all of the transit lines be about the same distance from the center. Now, there's nothing wrong with this. I didn't really understand it, but my problem with it is that it makes the ride to Braintree look to be about the same, if not shorter, than the ride to Ashmont. Now, while this was all playing out internally at the MBTA, a station on the Blue Line that had been closed for 2 years to make it accessible, it reopened, and this map appeared in this station at 8 different locations. This is the Aquarium Station on the Blue Line. This is the only place that this map ever appeared on the MBTA. And in fact, this map is still there. So if you ever go in the Long Wharf Marriott entrance, go down the long escalator, when you get to the bottom, go to the far left-hand corner, and in the usually hiding behind a wastebasket or a fan, you will see this map here. Now, at this point, I attended a lot of high-level meetings. There was a lot of animated discussion back and forth, and then it was decided that this would then become the official MBTA rapid transit map, soon to appear in a station near you. But if you haven't noticed something already, this map doesn't have something. And what it lacks is a shoreline. And that's because in order to get this map distributed and installed in every station, I had to surrender my digital files to the people who resented me and my new design. So in one little last act of spite, they removed the water and claimed it was a printing mistake. Now, in the long run, it didn't matter because the people that didn't like me or my map design, all one by one, eventually in the next few years, either left or resigned from the MBTA. And one by one, the maps all got replaced containing a shoreline. In those intervening years, there were 2 big things that happened at the MBTA. The first was the creation of a key bus route system. This is where the MBTA took existing bus routes, modified their schedules, so they would essentially work as extensions of the rapid transit system. The second thing was automated fare collection. Now with the Charlie card, it was going to be easier and less expensive to move back and forth and transfer between modes. Well, the MBTA really wanted to capitalize on this. And so they wanted me to basically add the key bus routes to the already existing map. Now, in order to make this happen, I had to remove the highways to make room. But what should have happened in a perfect world is I should have been allowed to redesign the map from the ground up to add these new bus routes. But they didn't want me to do that. They figured this map's only about 5 years old. We want the public's already used to it. So we didn't want to confuse them with a whole new map design. So I basically had to shoehorn in the key bus routes into the already existing rapid transit map. Now, this was very easy to do, but if you look at it, at least from my point of view, it doesn't make for very good design. This map is very busy. There's a lot going on. The eye kind of doesn't know where to look. And take, for example, the Route 66. Look at how it's winding all over the map, desperately trying to make all of its rapid transit connections. Now, at this point, I assumed this was the end of the story. This is around the year 2007, and I figured that any future version or variation of this map would come from this design right here. But I always wanted to be able to go back one more time and try to maybe take what I've learned, kind of fix all these problems and try to make a much better map. Well, turns out 6 years later, I got my chance to do so, but it came at a very, very scary time. And that was in the summer of 2013, when the Secretary of Transportation at the time made the MBTA have a contest whereby members of the public would submit their designs for a new map. And these are the entries going by on your screen here. At the end of the contest, the public would vote, and whichever one won the contest would then become the new official MBTA rapid transit map. Now, of course, as you can imagine, I was horrified. I was not involved in this process. I was not asked or approached by the secretary. I pretty much just had to sit by the sidelines and watch this whole thing play out. I was not only insulted from the idea that basically it sounds like anyone can do this kind of work, so we'll just have the public do it. But I was even more insulted because since the MBTA is a public agency and it can't give out prize money or rewards or any compensation for something like this, it sent the message that what I do isn't worthy of compensation. And as a result, all the professional cartographers in the world got on social media and warned each other, don't enter this contest. And so at the end of the day, we only had amateur entries. Now, this here is the winning map, or at least a portion of it. And it turns out at the end of the day, they couldn't use the map even if they wanted to, because one, it was submitted by a man who lives in Russia. And the issue here is that a man from another country and not a professional cartographer doesn't know the rules laid out by the American Disabilities Act of what you can and cannot do on a map. So one of the first issues here is this map has colored text. Now, personally, I would love to be able to use colored text. It would make my job as a designer a lot easier, but you're not allowed to do that. All text must be solid black. You must use a sans serif font, and it must be on a light or white background to make the contrast as high as possible. The next issue with this map was right here. The text here, it's not only is it not black, but it's too small. It doesn't meet the minimum size requirements for a map of this scale. And the brown lines showing the buses are too thin. But the real issue, the most controversial one, was one of these symbols right here. If you can't see it, it's okay. There are a number of these on the map, but this is essentially a wheelchair symbol with a slash going through the middle of it. And one might ask, why would you want a symbol like that? Well, let's first be perfectly clear. This is the official symbol that you use to denote a facility for being accessible. And in the cartography world, we call this an ISA, the International Symbol for Access. Now, the MBTA is currently about 88% accessible, which means there's going to be lots of these symbols on the map. Now, some have made the argument that this clutters up the map and we need to find a way to get rid of these. The other side of the argument is if you need to know if a facility is accessible, then you're going to want this symbol to be prominent. Now, maybe one day in the near future, the MBTA will be 100% accessible, and maybe we make a note in the legend and take these symbols off. But for now, they need to be used. But many people over the years and the contest winner proposed the idea of let's just find something to highlight the stations that aren't accessible, because there aren't as many of those. Well, you have a problem here. You have several problems, actually. The first one is you have to create your own symbol, which is a no-no. This is a bunch of them that I have collected over the years. By the way, my favorite is the one in the middle. Let's just turn the symbol upside down. But I can't speak for anyone else, but in all honesty, if I had a symbol that denoted my tribe and it had a slash going through it, I might be offended. But the real issue here is you're attempting to show a negative. And by a negative, I don't mean something that's bad. I mean something that's not there. So think about it. You're going to take one of these symbols, put it next to a station to tell the user that this facility does not exist at this station, and thereby conclude, hopefully, that all the stations that have no symbol do have this facility. It's very counterintuitive, and it simply will not work. So at the end of the day, you're going to have to use your ISAs. But then the story took another interesting turn, and that is that in the fall of 2013, the governor of Massachusetts at the time announced he wasn't running for re-election. This meant that the Secretary of Transportation wasn't going to have his job too much longer. And so now all the mishigas around this contest got put to the back burner. Unfortunately, it put the MBTA in a really uncomfortable situation because now they had a contest-winning map that they couldn't use because it wasn't ADA compliant, but the media and the local press had shown pictures of this map and announced that this was the new map and you should get used to seeing it real soon. The T couldn't make it compliant because if they did, they'd be changing the original map and therefore it wouldn't be the contest winner. So then this really weird legal catch-22. They could have approached the person in Russia and asked him to make it ADA compliant if he knew how, but that would mean putting him on the payroll, and the MBTA is not allowed to fund somebody out of the country or even out of state for that matter. So at the end of the day, the decision was, I will make the new map, but I will make it look as much like the contest winner and hopefully everybody will be happy. Well, at this point, I figured this was it. This is my swan song, my last chance. So I'm going to go out with a bang, and I'm going to try to make the best map I can and try to solve all these issues that have cropped up over the years. But I also wanted to take advantage of something, and that is that during the contest, people were allowed to leave comments at mbta.com. There were 10,000 of these comments, and I had the MBTA give me these comments, and I read every single one of them, because I wanted to get a sense of what people liked and didn't like, either about the contest winner, any of the entries, or even my map. Now, keep in mind, this is social media, so about 90% of the language is foul and vile, because that's what social media seems to be for, but about 10% of the comments were actually very helpful and useful. And what I discovered is that one of the things that people liked about the contest winner is that even though he abandoned geographic realism, he found a way to get every single Green Line station to be both shown and labeled, something that I had been unsuccessful at doing for the past 20 years. And I figured, this makes complete sense. I mean, with the Charlie card, you can go anywhere on the MBTA system. It's all easy to use, one big happy family. So why are we leaving information off the map? It's a completely valid argument. So I figured, well, if that's what people really, really liked, let me take my existing map at the time and find a way to make it work. And you can see here that I did. There was a way to actually be successful after all these years. The problem is that this final design was not well received. One, because it didn't look enough like the contest winning map, but two, a lot of the stations are written at a 45-degree angle. Now, there's nothing wrong with this. There's nothing wrong with angle text, but it is harder to read and it makes the map look really busy. So I went back to the contest winner again, read through the comments again, and noticed that if I read between the lines, people were hinting at something that they didn't quite put their finger on. And oftentimes people know that they like something or don't like something, but they may not know exactly why. And what I was able to figure out is what people were responding to was they liked the fact that not all, but most of the station names here were written horizontally. That's when I knew what I had to do. It hit me. It wasn't easy to do. It took a lot of work, but at the end of the day, I found a way to get all this information to fit into this very, very small space. So now to this day, you have every single surface green line stop shown, labeled, and written out horizontally. Also, I decided to abandon geographic realism here and have the 4 branches of the green line and the orange line all be equally spaced. And what this does is it creates an implied grid. And this grid is a lot easier on the eye. So now you have a map with about a third more information than its predecessor, but it's actually easier to read. Also, I was able to get the key bus routes to go perpendicular through the implied grid. So now the Route 66 bus isn't winding all over the map. Now, one of the other things people liked about the contest winner was the treatment of the Silver Line. The Silver Line is the one service that the MBTA has that has an exception to it, and that is that it has one-way loops. If the vehicles are just turning around, then that would be fine. But no, there are stops on these one-way loops, so it becomes very imperative that the user know which way the loop is going, clockwise or counterclockwise. Well, people seem to respond very well to the use of the repeating arrowheads on the Silver Lines here. They implied that the service was slightly different, which it is, and made it very clear which way the routes were actually traveling. So we applied this to the map as it is today, and now you can clearly see that the SL5 is a counterclockwise loop, the SL4 is a clockwise loop, and you can clearly see where they split and branch off from one line, which is great. So now I don't have to draw 2 parallel lines, which would take up more room. And then we get to the airport. Now, this was a little problematic because the contest winner didn't draw it as a loop. Technically, that's okay, but the problem here is that this now implies that when the Silver Line gets to Terminal E, on its return, it will then hit every terminal again, which it does not do. It also created a situation where the airport terminals are now in reverse alphabetical order because people read down. But we also have to go back a little bit in time to understand that there was a lot more going on at the airport. When the Silver Line service to the airport was new, the T really wanted to focus on it. And so at that time, as you can see in this previous version here, we really downplayed the free Massport shuttle bus from Airport Station. In fact, it's not even labeled. You look at this dashed line and you might say, well, what is that? Is it underground? Is it temporary? Is it under construction? Now, it's labeled in the legend, but the point is that we were just really trying to showcase and show off the new Silver Line service. But somehow the airport service, or at least that service from Airport Station, kind of got a little lost. But then the wind kind of blew in the other direction. And now the service at the airport and the Silver Line is really, really popular, probably because it's free at the airport. But in those intervening years, Massport built a new series of access roads, purchased a new fleet of low-floor buses, and created a consolidated rental car facility. So now the MBTA, we wanted to show that the 2 ways to get to the airport had more balance to them. Well, this turned out to be the toughest nut to crack in the whole puzzle. I came up with about 12 different designs. This is a sample of about 4 of them here. None of them really worked. Nobody liked them. I didn't even like them. And I just kept banging my head against the wall, trying to get this to actually work. But you know how sometimes the most obvious thing is right in front of you and you just don't see it? Well, one day a colleague of mine said, you know, why don't you just put it on a 45-degree angle? Well, duh, now it just seems so obvious. And here we go. We have the very clear counterclockwise loop of the Silver Line hitting all the terminals in the proper order. We also have the thick blue line coming from Airport Station, also shown as a loop, hitting every terminal in the right order, as well as the rental car facility and the Logan Ferry. And with all of this craziness going on with this map, I just figured my days are numbered. This is it. Never in my entire career did I ever think that for any reason, let alone political ones, this would ever be taken away from me. And it's true. It's not my property. You know, the MBTA is just very, I think they're being good sports and just letting me do this for the past 30 years. And I'm grateful for them because I love it. Well, knowing or thinking that because I was getting paranoid then that this might be my swan song, I wanted to make a map that would outlive me. Yes, there's some ego and vanity going into that there, but I wanted to make a map, that had room for expansion. And one of the great things about working at the Boston MPO is that I work with a lot of planners, and planners focus on the future. And being armed with the knowledge of what was coming, I was able to set this map up so that with the click of a button, we're able to add the new extension of the Silver Line to Chelsea, which opened about 2 years ago. And if all goes well, maybe by the end of this year, or maybe no later than the beginning of next year, with another press of a button, we will now have the Green Line extension through Somerville to Medford. And finally, there was one more thing I always wanted to change on this map. The way it's drawn now, you can see that the green line is shown as crossing the orange line twice. Now, nowhere in the real world do the green line and orange line ever cross each other. They run parallel between Haymarket and North Station, but that's it. But the reason why this looks this way is because this is the way the contest winner had drawn it. And so I was told I had to leave it in. But the great news is that with the new map coming out later this year, this is what the green line and orange line interchange will look like. And it just goes to show you that if you just wait long enough, the more things change, the more they stay the same. Thank you.
Thank you so much, Ken, for that great presentation, all the stories. We're so happy to hear it. And so everyone who's joining us today, we'd love to open this up to some Q&A so you can talk a little bit more to Ken about the map. So you have two ways you can do that. You can either do that in the chat, or you can raise your hand and I'll call on you and unmute. But I just want to thank Ken again for that great presentation, and then we'll have some questions. So as you start to fill some of those in the chat, I see Alan has his hand raised. So Alan, I'm going to unmute you and you can ask your question. Oh, and I just want to remind everyone today, because this is quite a large group of us, if you could just be brief in your question, and so we can make sure and get to as many questions as possible. So I'm going to unmute you, Alan.
Hello. I really appreciate this. This is amazing. I knew there were various struggles going on behind the scenes of the MBTA regarding mapping, and you were the unsung hero. I'd never heard of you before. I always knew there was somebody in there. I really congratulate you on your persistence and really keeping the end user in mind rather than all this political and ego kind of battles going on, and not invented here and all that kind of stuff. It parallels in many ways what I know of what happened with the New York City transit map, the famous or infamous Vignelli original, you know, 45-degree, very schematic map, which designers seem to like, but which actual people who try to use the map, including myself, I remember when it first came out in the late 70s, it just didn't work. It showed things that I made all sorts of mistakes, got stuck places because the map just didn't work. And I'm just curious what comments on how much were you aware of this process going on in parallel, for example, in New York City, and how much did it influence you, and how much do you think you might have influenced them?
Well, thank you so much. That's a really interesting question. I knew the story behind the issues in New York, but the way I did it, and keep in mind, when I started doing this, I was a lot younger. And in some ways, some naivete might have helped. I simply looked at maps that I had used in my travels that worked. And my favorite one is, actually I have two favorites, the Washington, D.C. Metro and the London Underground. And I just looked at those maps and said, this works for me. So let me just try to model as much as I can off of those maps.
Interesting, because for New York City, there was a guy named Toranak who apparently came out with the map, which is essentially the one that's used now. And it's very much similar in many ways to the map that you were championing. And he seems to have been a sole one person also fighting a battle. This, you know, it's very interesting how one person internally championing the user finally won out.
Yes, Yes, that's what I've tried to do. I've tried to listen. That's been the biggest part of my 32-year career, actually going to be 33 soon, is just learning how to listen. Because at the end of the day, it doesn't matter if I understand it, everybody else has to. I can't make everybody happy, and it's hard to get feedback on a map because when people have trouble using a map, the user blames themselves and they'll just throw up their hands and say, I don't get it, or I don't get maps. And that's probably not true in a lot of cases. It could be that it's a poorly designed map. And so, like you said, I've just tried to listen as much as I can.
Thank you for championing the user.
Sure.
Well, thank you so much, Alan. So I'm going to make sure that we kind of go back and forth in between the chat questions and the in-person. So our first chat question is, Ken, could you talk a little bit about how the ferry routes are shown in the map?
So the ferry routes are interesting. They're kind of like the poor stepchild on the map, I have to admit. And a lot of it has been more decisions made internally. There have been different times over the past decades where they heavy emphasis on ferry, not an emphasis on them at all. And those decisions weren't made by me. And so now there's, we try to show them as consistently and as prominently as everything else, because one of the things that the Mbta really wants to get across is that there are all these different systems and they all work together. And particularly with the Charlie card being able to move from mode to mode, you shouldn't have to think this is completely different or it has to be treated as something separate. And so that's the main thing now, is to just try to treat it with as much respect and equality as other things on the map. But that's only been probably the past 10 years. Years ago, it just seemed like the ferries were kind of an afterthought, but that wasn't a decision made by myself.
Thanks, Ken. So next I'm going to call on Evan. So Evan, I'm going to unmute you and you can ask your question to Ken.
Hi, I'm a huge TMAP fan. One of my favorite hobbies is drawing them myself. And it's interesting to see how different designers prioritize different things on their maps. I prioritize grids and straight lines, and you prioritize geographic accuracy. So that's interesting.
Is there a question?
I don't know I think Evan just muted himself, so maybe we don't have. So next I'll go to one of the chat questions. So Ken, if the commuter rail system continues to move towards a more regional rail model, would you think it would make sense to change their representation from the color purple today to a more colorful scheme?
I don't know, because you have to factor in the fact that that's easy to do on a map, but since you have all these commuter rail stations with purple at the actual on the platforms, it's not a simple case of let's just change a color. So that would be a much larger discussion for more people at the Mbta. True, I can make it any color I want on the map, but that doesn't mean the Mbta has to agree to it.
Thanks, Ken. So our next question is from Bill Cutner, who you probably know pretty well, but Bill, you're unmuted. Do you want to ask your question?
Yeah, Ken, great presentation. I always learn new things. Quick, can you update us on the paper versus enamel debate? Your system map, is that going to be in enamel? That's sort of the sort of gold-plated but very expensive.
So what Bill Cutner is referring to, at least within an Mbta station, there are two ways that a map can be installed. It can be baked onto enamel porcelain, this very, expensive process, or it's printed onto vinyl and then it's just placed in like a frame. And usually the frame has a piece of plexiglass in front of it. There are still some places on the T where they do them the old enamel porcelain way, but the majority of them are done as basically these gigantic vinyl stickers that are often put into a metal frame with like a glass door, a plexiglass door. So the new map will be in both.
In both? So it will?
Where possible.
Okay, cool, thank you.
Thanks, Bill. So our next question, Ken, is from the chat. How did changes in drafting tools such as software change your design process?
Well, that's a good question, because when I did start doing this 33 years ago, there were no desktop computers, at least not in the office. And so it was all done by hand originally. I don't know how much the software has really changed any aspect of it, only in the sense that now the software is just easier to use. So I can do a lot of these things faster. And in some cases easier, but I don't think it's actually changed or really made a huge difference in how the map actually looks.
Thanks, Ken. So we actually have a question from another Ken with his hand raised. So Ken, I'm going to unmute you now, and you can ask your question to Ken.
Hey, Ken, keep hearing my name, knowing it's you. I have a question about how do you account for the fact that people so often now use maps on the small screen of their phones?
Yeah, this is now the big issue that we're trying to work with, because you make a very good point. For instance, there are lots of online apps that people can use on their phone that are going to use more of like a Google-based map, or something where you can use your fingers to zoom in and do things of that nature. This is a challenge. It's ongoing, but one of the nice things about the technology today is we're able to provide more maps in more forms. So instead of trying to maybe make a one size fits all, it would just be better to try to make more maps for more purposes and in more ways. And the system map that you saw today, not the system map, the spider map that you saw today is really meant to be used visually in places like stations and on vehicles and on websites. But on a phone, I could see how it wouldn't work. So I'm sure we would provide something else.
Thanks, Ken. So at this time, there's no more hand raised, so I'm just going to ask questions in the chat. But if a question pops up and you want to ask Ken directly, just raise your hand and I'll call on you. So Ken, our next draft or chat question is, are there any other maps that you're particularly inspired by and whose principles you follow?
I have to think about that. There are a couple of maps there's one in Tokyo that I really love. But I really, like I said earlier, I really like the Washington, D.C. Metro and the London Underground. And what I try to do is stick with that, kind of ortho, with what we call ortho angles, which is everything is at a 0.45 or 0 degree angle, and try to focus. You can't make it completely geographically realistic, but to kind of give a hint of that would be nice, but then simplifying it where you can.
Thanks, Ken. So my next question is, with all the in-station digital displays at the T, have you thought about a new map designed for those?
Well, this is interesting, because what I would love to see one day, and we may be there sooner than we think, is I want to see 4-foot square LCD panels in the stations where you could take the system map or the spider map as it is, have it in the station, and then you could put little marching ants along the edges of it to show where all the vehicles are in real time, and maybe make the map interactive so that you could expand it or contract it, or maybe press a button on a station and information might pop up at that station, like what buses leave from that station when they arrive. Maybe you can even do an interactive trip planner of some kind. I think that would be nice. But the reality is, if you're going to do that, these panels pretty much have to be indestructible. And I don't think we're there yet. So I'm sure there's going to be some a change moving forward, because a lot of the newer vehicles, like the newer orange line and green line cars, the displays are often on a LCD screen instead of an actual paper map. So I'm sure going forward, we'll be working with both.
Thanks, Ken. And so my next question is, how do you leave space for or account for new extensions such as the Silver Line to Chelsea and its potential next phase to Everett, or the Columbus Avenue bus lanes that the T is building?
Well, that's always the challenge, and that one would hope that there's some space on the map to show it. When I know in advance what the T is going to do a couple of years out, and you'd be amazed how long things can often be in the planning stage, that's one thing that can work to my advantage. But I may not be able to do everything, but you never know. They may extend, like if they extended the red line way past Braintree or the green line way past Riverside, then I'd probably have to change the scale of the map and kind of shrink it down a little bit and make it fit. But, I just kind of take it as they come.
Yeah, definitely. And we kind of have a part two to that question that I wanted to highlight, which is, have you thought a bit more about how we represent potentially new rapid bus transit, such as the Columbus Ave bus lane?
Well, one of the things that's going to be probably happening in the near future is we are working on a version of the rapid transit map that includes more of what we call the key bus routes. They may get renamed to high frequency bus routes or something of that nature. But right now we only show about half of them. I was not the one who just decided which ones that we were to show back in 2007 or 2006. But now there's a desire to show more, and they will be added to the map probably at some time.
Thanks, Ken. So another question we have is, what is, in your perspective, what is the purpose of the map? Is it for general guidance on the system as a whole, or for detailed trip planning that really requires headway info? When is there too much on the map?
I don't view it as, well, at least from the rapid transit standpoint, I don't view it as a headway issue. What I've experienced and watched people for years, because before the pandemic anyways, I took the train every day. And what I noticed is all people wanted to know was, where do I get on, how many stops, and where do I get off for transfer? It's all they care about. And they'll worry about, and when it comes to most things of a rapid transit nature, there's kind of this built-in expectation that I shouldn't have to wait too long. So I just stand on the platform or stand at the bus stop for a high frequency bus and the vehicle will show up. So frequency is less of an issue, and I don't think it's a concern. They just want to know how to get from point A to point B, and hopefully the map will give them that.
No, that's great. So Ken, I have both kind of an example and then a more of a kind of audience question, but was there a specific reason that the silver line was shown using a thick line similar to the subway rather than a thinner line similar to the buses? And that kind of leads into another question of around who makes the decisions about how to differentiate between modes. Is it the U or the T?
So the thickness of the line has, I may have input, but for the most part at the time, particularly when the silver line was new, they wanted it to stand out. They wanted it to be the fifth transit line that it is. So from their point of view, and understandably so, they saw no reason why it couldn't at least be as close to or almost as thick as the other rapid transit lines. And whether that's fair or not is another argument, but that's what was done at the time. And of course, with some of these dedicated bus routes, like the new one that's going to go on Columbus Avenue, I don't know how that's going to shape out. I don't know if they're going to give that a new color. I don't think so. But the idea here is that for the most part, that decision is not made by me. Even the color choice was not made by me.
So Ken, now I have a couple of fun questions for you. One audience member asked, what is your favorite line?
My favorite line?
Yeah, well, if you had to pick one.
If I had to pick one, people are going to think I'm crazy, but I love the green line. It's just like an old-fashioned streetcar, kind of like with the Mattapan high-speed line. Those two are my favorites because I just love the old world charm to it. Even though the vehicles look brand new now and they don't look like anything did 100 years ago, there's just something about that kind of old school charm.
I like that. My next one for you is, could you tell us more about how you started making maps?
So I'm going to be honest, I did not go to school for this. I fell into this by accident, and I am 100% self-taught. So if you ever want an example of somebody who can learn on the job, it's me. I started at the Boston MPO as an entry-level cartographer. And initially, when I got the job, I was mostly excited because I was really into highways. And I wanted to know everything about the big dig. The big dig was still in the planning stages. The MPO had all the plans. I saw them laid out on people's tables, and I was like, oh God, I got to work here, even if it's just to learn about the artery. And then somehow along the way, I noticed, wow, I'm not too bad at drawing these transit maps. And it just kind of evolved from there. And just the more I did it, the more I got better at it. And the more my client, which was the MBTA, seemed to like my work, and they were very encouraging, and they let me do it. And 33 years later, and we're still here.
It's always fun to kind of hear how someone got to where they are. And that kind of makes me think of this other question that we got asked, which is, you said that last map could be your swan song. But the question was, is it? And are you still working, or are you working on another? And what's next for you?
Well, it's funny because at the time of the contest, because the media had announced that this was the new map and it's soon to appear in a station near you, which of course never happened, I still have people coming up to me today going, oh, Ken, I knew you used to work on the T map. That's such a bummer you don't do it anymore. No, that's not true. Actually, what happened is that I'm still working on it. I still have been, as far as I know, as long as they let me, I always will be. I don't plan on dying, okay? I'm gonna be here a long time. I love doing this. And right now we're working on, or I've worked on the newest version, which will have the new Green Line extension. There's also the B line consolidation that's going on right now, where they're consolidating some stations on the B line. And there's the new Chelsea Superstation, where the end of the SL3 and the commuter rail are going to be kind of put together as one station. And as I mentioned earlier, hopefully more high frequency bus routes will be added to the map as well. The challenge now we're having is that by adding more of these lines to the map, now it looks like a bowl of spaghetti. And so we have to really be careful to make this stuff be as clear as possible. And that's the hard part, is that it's easy to get it on the map. That's the easy part. The hard part is then to look back and go, okay, I'm lost. Can we find a way to streamline this a little bit and simplify it a little bit? And we're working through that process now.
And Ken, that kind of makes me think of this other question we got, which kind of that push and pull of, how much you put on the map and how you don't. But the question was, could you imagine showing the entire bus network on the same map as the rail network?
I'm not quite sure what exactly you mean, but I'm going to say no.
Yeah, I think it's like every bus route, along with like every subway line, every regional rail or commuter rail.
Not on a map of that scale. I mean, because since the rapid transit map only shows the limits of the rapid transit system, and a lot of buses go way beyond, there's no way you would have to have a different map. And that's one of the things that's great about today. We can just make another map in another style and another format to show other information, put it on the website or make it available. Maybe it isn't in the station, but I would argue the maps in the stations and the vehicles should be for getting around, and other information can be gotten another way.
Yeah. So some other questions we got in the chat are, do you have any thoughts on how the map can be even more accessible to people with disabilities?
Well, one of the things that there is a colorblind version of the map that will hopefully be appearing on the website sometime soon. There's even versions of the map that I've made that show how many steps it is to walk between every single stop. So you can find out what stations are actually a lot closer together than you think. And the ones that are extra close have a little line between them with a little icon of a pedestrian to let people know that even though on the map it's drawn as far apart, this is only a 2-minute walk. Because one of the big issues that's come up over the years is, well, there's always this fight and struggle between, well, this is really just a schematic, but we're trying to draw some sense of reality. But if we're too real, then yes, you can't show the two stations are really close together. Well, you can, but then you sacrifice too many other things on the map. So at the end of the day, something has to go. And so it'd be nice to create other versions of the map that help compensate for these things that we have to sacrifice.
Thanks, Ken. So one question we got was, how is this integrated with Google Maps, or how might it be?
That's a good question, because this particular map is a schematic, so it doesn't follow geographic reality. And everything on Google Maps is following some real world geography. They have the aerial photographs. I don't really know how it would actually work I don't think there is any way. I think this is kind of a separate entity in the way that the London Underground map is, and the DC map, and the New York and the Paris and so on.
And Ken, do you think there might be a map where it shows locations of rental bikes, such as blue bikes?
If that's at a particular station, I'm sure we could add symbols for that. That's not a decision that would be made by me. The only concern with that, of course, is that those could change because it's a private vendor and it's not run by, it's one thing to tell people there's a bike rack or a bike shelter at a station, because that's pretty much the responsibility of the MBTA, but the private bike share company is not, and they could change very often. And so if you do that, you run the risk of the map being coming out of date much quicker than you would want. So that would be an internal discussion for the T to decide before I would do anything like that.
So Ken, another question we got was, what are your thoughts on shifting the main rapid transit maps to a frequency map, like San Francisco's Muni, to show connecting routes with the same frequency as subway as a broader network?
Well, on the rapid transit map, the assumption is that the frequency is mostly the same, even with the key bus routes. So frequency is not an issue on that particular map. That was the whole point, is with the key bus routes, was to make their frequency be as close to the rapid transit system, or at least the rail lines, as possible, so that the user wouldn't really notice any real change in service. So I don't know on, now that there are other maps, is the MBTA system map, which is the big fold out map. I also do that map too. The big fold out map that shows the entire system. Everything's geographically laid out. Every single bus route is shown as its own color. There may be ways to show frequency on that map, but on this particular map, no. There's no need to.
Oh, Ken, thank you so much. So I'm just want to let the audience know that we're kind of getting to the, we're getting through all of the questions. So if you have any of yours that you want to make sure that are included that Ken gets to answer, please make sure to either send the chat or raise your hand. So Ken, we actually got quite a couple questions. I know you talked about this a little bit in your talk around, you know, how the T-map relates to Harry Beck's original design for the London Underground in 1932. But like, you know, how do you think the maps compare, or do you think they're kind of like different because of the different locales?
It's funny, I don't really compare my map to other people's maps. I just use other maps as inspiration. You know, like I said before, when I was doing my research, I just look at the maps that are out there and say, oh, I like what this one did here, and I like what that one did there. And I try it, and not everything works the same. Like, for instance, you know how the London Underground, the lines are thinner and they use little tick marks for the stations, as opposed to we use fat lines with round circles, similar to the way the Washington, D.C. Now, the only reason why that decision was made is because we don't have as many lines as the London Underground. If we had 13, you know, transit lines, then we wouldn't be able to do the system that we have now. So it's things like that that kind of make the decision for you. At least from my point of view as a designer, that seems like it seems obvious, but I don't want to assume that that is obvious. But that's where my headspace is at. You look at a map, you look at what works, you try it, and then you realize, no, this won't, and this will. So you go with that. I hope that answered the person's question.
No, thank you so much for that. And it always makes me think of that map making as both like obviously a highly technical skill, but also a work of art. So we have a question from Christian. Christian, I'm going to unmute you now so you can ask Ken.
Hi, Ken. Thank you so much for talking about this.
Sure.
My name is Christian Milne. I'm the editor of Truthblog Massachusetts. And I'm a huge fan of your work. I'm also really interested in how transit agencies sort of use maps and other materials to visually communicate their services to people. Mm-hmm. And this is something that I actually kind of wish, I don't think this is really on you. I kind of wish the MBTA could do a better job with it. I've noticed that other agencies, and I think Los Angeles Metro does a really good job with this, where they have a very consistent design vocabulary, and they have signage standards and map standards, so that, you know, they have multiple people designing maps and signage for them, but they're all drawing from a similar, you know, the same design vocabulary, so that everything looks visually consistent. I don't think MBTA has that. And maybe, has that ever been talked about? It seems like that might have been something that the Cambridge 7 people tried to do a long time ago. Can you talk about that a little bit?
Well, I can speak to this. I work very heavily a lot with the design and construction department, and there are standards, and they are there. They've been there for a long time. I believe there's a standard guide. I think the issue that might be that because the MBTA is a large system and only has so much money, maybe they don't get around to upgrading or changing or updating things as often as maybe the user would like. But as far as I know, there are standards. They're very strict, and we're sticking to them because I know I have to.
Awesome. Thank you, Ken.
Sure.
So we got kind of one is, really actually about a future question. We're in Boston, we're near the coast. Do you think there would be anything like amphibious trains if coastal flooding overtakes current tracks where train cars run underground? I may not be a question for you, but it was more of a fun one we got in the chat.
Well, I used to jokingly say to my wife that when the global warming comes and the sea level rise, that Commonwealth Avenue in the back of the bay is going to be a two-way ferry route. But besides that, I don't know. I'm sure the team could do something, sure.
So some more we got are there other maps that you've worked on, such as the bigger MBTA system map, that you love to talk to us about?
Well, basically, I do a lot of maps. I do most, if not all, I wouldn't say all the maps of the MBTA, but I do most of them. I also do all the a lot of the mass DOT highway maps. So if you've ever seen the state highway map that you can get, what we call a glove compartment map, the big fold out map that you can get of the entire state. You can get it sometimes at a visitor center. And people may remember that there was a time when there used to be a Massachusetts Turnpike Authority, a separate authority from Mass Highway, and they had their own map. I mean, I've done all of those maps as well. So I'm doing both the road side and the transit side. But the difference is that with the DOT, I'm not doing the majority of their maps. They're done using GIS software. I'm using doing the maps that are basically done in what we call a non-GIS or more of an artistic environment. But also on the T, if you've ever seen any of those neighborhood maps where you go in and there's a quarter-mile radius from the station, I do all those too.
Thanks, Ken. So another one we got was, should public transportation and intermodal cartography become a national effort?
That's an interesting idea. I'm not quite sure. I do know that I saw a website once that somebody actually went and redrew every single transit map in the world so they all looked the same. They were consistent. I'm not a fan of that. And the reason why is because for me, it's a case of consistency is overrated. You could make the argument that then they'd be easier to use in every city if you went there because they'd all be the same. But I think one of the things I like about the local map is the local geography and the local look, and it kind of defined. It's almost like a branding thing. I don't want the T map to look like every other map, just the way I'm sure DC wants theirs to look like theirs and LA to look like theirs and so on.
No, I like that, Ken. I mean, even me, I'm a huge fan, and I look for my specific MBTA puzzles because I like the look of it.
Right.
But lastly, I think we'll start to close out the Q&A. I've gotten to ask Ken a ton of questions. But lastly, maybe I'll ask, could you share what software you use to make your maps?
So it's a combination. Well, it's mostly done in Adobe Illustrator. It didn't start that way because 33 years ago, we didn't have this program, but that's what I use now. And the way it's often drawn is if I need to, I can start with a GIS map and work from there and use it as a guide to work my way up. But it's simply the way I do it is it's a very simplistic, tedious process. I have a grid laid down. I start in the middle and I just work my way out. And it takes however long that it's going to take. And a lot of times the length of the lines and where the bends in the line are determined by how many stops I have to put between point A and point B before there's a change. So the map it's kind of like a big puzzle. And the map, in my mind, the way my brain works, the map kind of draws itself. But just to me, I'm just using my hands to do it.
So I think my last question for today, I know we still have some comments coming in, but I want to make sure that Ken kind of gets to like wrap up, is can you talk about how the typography was picked for the map?
So the typography is actually part of that standards that somebody mentioned earlier. Does the T have standards? Yeah. Now, it wasn't originally like that. Before the American Disabilities Act was passed, it was a little bit more of the Wild West, and a lot of the things the rules existed, but they weren't really enforced, and that's really changed in the past 30 years, and rightfully so. I mean, they really should. I mean, you're trying to design for all. And so there are only like one or two, maybe three fonts that I'm allowed to use. You know, they cannot be color. They have to be sans serif. And that's pretty much, that decision is not made by me. If it were up to me, I would make all the station names as short as possible, because that would give me more room on the map, because there's nothing worse than, you know, New England Medical Center, you know, having to write out the whole long name, but that's just me.
Hey, but then we lose some of our fun long names.
Exactly. Exactly.
Well, Ken, I just want to say thank you so much for coming to talk to us today about the whole history of the map. I don't know if you had to see in the chat, there's tons of thank yous from audience members. You know, we love getting to kind of showcase some of the work of our team members at the MPO. So please be on the lookout if you're interested in events like these in the future. If anyone wants to show their little hand clapping emojis or reactions in the Zoom, you can show that to Ken now. But with that, I just want to say thank you all for coming. And we hope to see you in future events. And Ken, if you have any final words, please feel free to share too.
I just want to say, I'm so glad you all came today. This was a lot of fun to share about this. I love to talk about my work. I know I'm this hidden figure. People don't know about me, but you know, I don't seek out fame or anything like this, but I love to talk about my work. I love doing it. And this was just a lot of fun. I hope I get to do it again. And who knows, maybe there'll be some other drama in 10 years and I'll be talking about that.
Yeah, and maybe our hope too is to have one in person when we're all able to again in the future.
Right.
Thank you so much, Ken. Oh,
sure.
Yeah, go ahead.
I was going to say, and if you haven't noticed what I'm wearing,
your tea map.
There we go. It's a tea tie. So.
And just so everyone, the recording is going to be available on the Boston Region MPO's YouTube channel. We're going to send out all this info in an email right after this event. Well, thank you all so much, and I hope you have a wonderful rest of your day.